truthfully, is one of my favorite baits. It's kind of a sleeper. I don't think a lot of people throw it. It being a little bit smaller profile or lengthwise than than most baits. It does only have 2 hooks on it, but that bait has a really unique action. Hey everybody, welcome back to the garage and welcome back to a video. Really, this is gonna be like a 3-part series, and I guess this is part 1 of this 3-part series of breaking down some different baits, looking at underwater action. We've done that with some soft baits, doing it now with some hard baits, and looking at actions of these baits and kind of how that would help you apply them into your fishing. And then some part of this might be a little bit of modification kind of stuff that we may do with some of these baits, but especially this first one. This first one is all about jerk baits and looking at some different styles of jerk baits and really what weighting jerk baits can kind of do to them and give you a little bit of different actions and stuff underwater. So got really 3 different, I'm gonna say, families of jerk baits here that we're looking at. Each have a regular, each have a deep model. We'll start in chronological order, and that one would be the Rapala Shadow Rap. This is the first one that came out, and Rapala really started adding to their jerkbait lineup. They've had the Husky jerk around forever. They've had the X-Rap. Those are great baits as well. Honestly, one of the first baits with a weight transfer system in them was that X-Rap that they made popular. But the Shadow Rap and the Shadow Rap Deep, both of those jerkbaits have been around for a number of years now and are good baits. These are definitely very solid jerkbaits. They do not have a slide weight in them. So the neat thing with that is that bait is going to always be the same. It's going to be very consistent. You're not going to have a lot of variation if the weight moves around in the bait or anything like that. You don't have to worry about that happening. It's going to stay very, very consistent. A slide weight in a jerk bait like what we have in the new Maverick, obviously that does help your casting distance. When that weight slides to the back, it helps it cast and cut through the wind really, really well doing that. But that Shadow Rap, and that is the shallow or the regular one, and it is a shallow running bait. I mean, this is like a 3-foot, maybe 4-foot diving bait, and that's something where you don't see a lot of suspending jerk baits, truthfully, is in that really, really shallow, that top part of the water column. I've caught a lot of fish on that particular bait, as well as its cousin over here we're going to talk about in a second. And shallow fisheries, especially grass stuff like down in Florida, because it's something that you can fish really shallow, keep above the grass, and keep it up there. But the Shadow Rap and the Shadow Rap Deep, both those baits have a good cutting side-to-side action, and you see it even more so on that Shadow Rap Deep. You pop the line, and that bait will cut 90 degrees one way, then it'll cut 90 degrees back the other way. It really has a good cut, and it just goes and stops, goes and stops. It does that extremely well. But the bait, it moves and stops. It moves and stops. And that's because that weight is fixed in it. So it doesn't kind of have that rock to a stop kind of deal like some jerk baits will. Cold water, I think that's a plus because that bait's going to move and stop, move and stop, move and stop. Much more like what a Husky jerk or something like that does. Similar deal with the Shadow Rap Shad. Obviously a little bit different profile than the regular Shadow Rap. It's a little bit more minnow shaped. That Shadow Rap Shad, a little bit taller bait. And again, that shallow one, that's one that I've caught a lot of fish on, especially in those shallow fisheries like down in Florida or places like that, trying to keep it above the grass. I've caught a lot of fish on it. But the Shadow Rap Shad Deep, truthfully, is one of my favorite baits. It's kind of a sleeper. I don't think a lot of people throw it. It being a little bit smaller profile or lengthwise than most baits. It does only have 2 hooks on it. I typically upsize those to number 4 VMC red lines. But that bait has a really unique action. And the Shadow Rap Shad, when you pause it, you can't really see it real well in there, but the weight it's positioned a little bit further back in the bait. Helps it cast a little bit better. But when you pause that bait, and you can see it when I stop it here underwater, when you pause, it goes nose up, and then it will actually slowly rise if you have it, with just the standard hooks on it. The hooks I typically put on with those red lines being a little bit bigger, it's going to suspend or possibly even sink, but it does still go to that nose up posture. So the bait goes from a head down, you jerk, that bait twitches, it darts, but then at the pause, it orients in place and then, kind of changes its posture. That little bit of extra movement, in my opinion, gets bites. It's just something that the fish aren't used to seeing a whole lot of, and the way that it turns, and that bait is really lively. I think it's because of that weight being set back a little bit. I don't know, it's a more lively bait in a lot of ways for that style of jerk bait to be like it is. Something that honestly I've caught a lot of fish on, and I think again it's kind of a sleeper. Certainly the newest one in the lineup is the Maverick, Maverick and Maverick Deep. Both of these do have slide weights in them, so they're, you know, some of the best casting jerk baits that we've ever had from Rapala. Really, really good baits, and we've got some really great colors in them, very natural colors. And that regular Maverick, you know, it'll run 5 or 6 feet deep, and it is your kind of your standard. Like, I mean, it's what a jerk bait is supposed to be. It's got, again, got the slide weight in it, and the action that it has, it moves and it kind of it does that roll to a stop that I was talking about because of having those weights not being fixed in it. It lets it kind of, it kind of shimmies to a stop, cuts really good, hard side to side, but not so much that you're often gonna, you know, foul the bait up by catching one of your hooks on the line like you will do with some jerk baits. It's not gonna foul up a lot. And a bait that you can fish it really soft, you know, and the bait still have good action. Or if you want to get really aggressive with it, you can do that. And the same to be said about that Maverick Deep. And it is a deep bait. I mean, this thing will get 10, 11, 12 feet deep on a long cast. And that's something that's pretty hard to do with a jerk bait and still keep the action really good. And that's what's nice with that Maverick Deep, is that it does still have that good cutting and still rocking side to side action. So really good thing with that. The last little tip, just something of a modification that, you know, if you ever want to do with your jerk baits, is using suspend dots or suspend strips. Putting those on the belly of the bait is the way I personally like to do it. Obviously, it does cover up some color. If you want, you know, to keep that color, I always keep some Sharpies handy in the boat, and I'll actually color over that suspend strip. If I wanted that orange to show up, I've got orange Sharpies. I can color it back up. But the big thing I'm going to do, if I want that bait to act exactly like it was from the factory, as far as posture-wise and that kind of thing, make sure you put that suspend strip right underneath where the bait is weighted from the factory. That balance point, if you offset that, you're going to change the attitude of the bait. So like on this Shadow Wrap Shad, that weight is right here. I put this suspend strip up here. We actually did that on purpose, and you can see in the pool that normally it was sitting like this. Putting that strip, you know, up a little bit further, it actually kind of flattened that bait out quite a bit. So if I'm wanting to keep the same action of what that bait's doing from the factory, make sure you center up any weight you're going to add to it, center that up with where the factory weight is supposed to be at in that bait. So just a little tip for you there. But the main reason to do that is either to get the bait to suspend perfectly, or even to get it to sink, you know, to where you can actually get that bait to sink down to those fish and, you know, fish a little bit deeper than what you traditionally would. But that's kind of a jerkbait breakdown, looking over a few of those, a little bit different applications. For me, generally speaking, warmer water seems like for me is when I have really caught them best on the Shadow Wrap Shad as well as the Maverick. You know, I can work those baits aggressive and get a really good reaction bite out of those fish. That Shadow Wrap Deep is a good cold water bait, especially. You can catch them in cold water on those other ones, but it's really about, you know, not overfishing the bait, because the bait can be very lively. So just don't overfish those other jerk baits when the water's really cold. I think that'll help you get out there and catch some big fish.